Security kicks out. Elderly. Black veteran from US airport. One call. Later, the entire terminal shuts down. It was barely 7:30 a.m. when Harold B. Jackson touched down at Reagan National Airport. At 74 years old, the retired Army Master Sergeant moved a little slower than most, but his back was still straight, and his sharp brown eyes missed nothing. He'd flown in from Atlanta for one reason, to surprise his granddaughter Maya at her college art showcase in D.C., a promise he made when she was just a wide-eyed freshman, and he was still fit enough to drive cross-country. Now, 3 years later, a heart surgery and 2 strokes behind him, he was finally here. Or so he thought. He adjusted his weathered navy blue ball cap that read, Vietnam Vet, 101st Airborne, and stepped off the jetway, pulling behind him an old leather duffel held together with duct tape and hope. As he entered the main terminal, the crowd swirled around him, families, business travelers, kids on spring break, all of them swept up in the urgency of departure and reunion. Harold didn't rush. He didn't need to. He had called ahead, confirmed his schedule, and had printed his itinerary on paper in case his flip phone failed him. The plan was simple. Grab a coffee, wait an hour for Maya to pick him up, and maybe find a quiet corner to read the letter his late wife had written him before she passed. But his day, his dignity, and his silence were all about to be ripped apart. "Sir," came a voice behind him. Firm, clipped. Harold turned. 2 TSA agents stood behind him, both young, both white, both visibly uneasy. One of them, a lean man with closely cropped hair and mirrored sunglasses perched on his head, stepped forward. "Can I see your ID again?" Harold blinked. "I just went through screening." Everything checked out. "Routine inquiry, sir. Please follow us." The second agent, a woman no older than 30, reached for his bag. "We'll need to examine your luggage." "No, you won't." His voice was calm, but iron hard. "That bag's been through security. It's cleared. So have I." The man's jaw tightened. "Sir, step aside now." Passengers started to slow. A few glanced over, curious. Harold hesitated, then nodded, stepping toward the side wall near Gate 26. The agents led him a few feet away, but made no attempt to keep their voices down. "We've had a report," the woman said, eyes flicking to the duffel. "You match the description of someone suspicious. Possible false identity." Harold stared at her. "False identity? I'm a retired Army sergeant. That's my name, my ID. You want to call Fort Benning? Go ahead. They've got records going back to '68. The man interrupted. "We've also received word your travel intent may not be what you claimed. We'll be verifying that now." "I'm here to see my granddaughter," Harold said, the steel in his voice louder now. "She's at Howard." Art student, honors program. This flight was cleared, this bag was checked. "I don't know who fed you that garbage, but I've done nothing wrong." By now, a small cluster of travelers had stopped walking and were watching. A woman whispered something and began recording on her phone. Harold saw it. He didn't flinch. The TSA agent looked increasingly uncomfortable but didn't stop. "Sir, you'll need to come with us for secondary screening." "For what reason?" "Refusal to comply." "I complied," Harold said, heat in his voice. "I just don't like being profiled." There was a beat of silence. The word hung in the air like a grenade. That was when a third person entered the scene, a private security officer from the airport's contracted team, tall, barrel-chested, wearing dark blue, latex gloves snapping on. "This him?" the guard asked. "Yes," the agent replied, grateful. "Escorting now." Without warning, the security officer stepped forward, reached for Harold's arm, and pulled him forward. Harold jerked his shoulder back, not aggressively, but on instinct. "Don't touch me," he said. The guard's eyes narrowed. "You're causing a disturbance. You're leaving this terminal now." I have every right to be here. Not anymore. Before Harold could say another word, the man yanked the duffel from his shoulder and turned him forcefully toward the exit. He didn't cuff him, but the implication was clear. You're not welcome here. As they moved through the terminal, dozens of heads turned. Some people stared. Others looked away. A few recorded. Sir, you're not under arrest, the agent said quickly, likely aware that the optics looked bad. You're just being removed for safety. For whose safety? Harold asked, voice cracking now. Not with fear, but with anger. I've served this country, bled for it, buried friends for it, and now you're throwing me out of a damn airport like I'm trash? Silence. When they finally pushed open the side door near the employee lot and shoved him out into the cold DC wind, Harold stood still for a long moment. His breath was steady. His hands trembled slightly, not from age, from restraint. The security officer dropped the duffel on the pavement beside him. You can wait here for someone to pick you up. You're not coming back inside. Harold didn't look up. Get your supervisor. You don't get to demand that. Harold pulled his wallet out slowly, flipping past his driver's license, VA card, and Medicare info until he reached a laminated card in the back, yellowed with age, edges bent. He didn't show it yet. Not yet. Get your supervisor and call this number, he said, pulling out a separate handwritten card from the bottom of the wallet. Tell them Harold B. Jackson needs to speak to Colonel Joseph Whitaker at the Department of Defense. The officer sneered. Yeah, right. Call it. He didn't. Instead, he turned and walked back toward the terminal door. Harold remained where he was, squinting into the wind, pulling his hat down over his ears. He reached for the battered flip phone in his coat pocket. No signal. But that didn't matter. He had memorized that number years ago. He punched in the digits one by one, then waited. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice answered. Male. Crisp. Alert. Whitaker. Harold didn't waste time. This is Sergeant Jackson. They just kicked me out of Reagan. I need it handled. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then just 2 words. Understood. Stand by. Click. Harold closed the phone and tucked it away. For the first time that morning, he allowed himself a slow breath. Not from relief. From preparation. Something was about to happen, and no one inside that terminal had any idea what was coming. The wind cut sharper against Harold's cheeks now. The cold wasn't what bothered him. It was the sting of what just happened. Being shoved out of an airport like a threat. Like he hadn't spent a lifetime defending the very country now questioning his right to walk freely within its borders. He didn't move, didn't pace, didn't fumble for another call. He simply stood still, back straight, breath even. His army instincts told him, hold position until the cavalry arrives. Inside, the airport buzzed along as if nothing had happened. Terminal announcements echoed over the speakers, flights boarding, people chatting, rolling suitcases dragging across the tiles. But just beneath that surface, a current began to shift. In a security operations room on the mezzanine level, a young supervisor named Alison Marquez squinted at her monitor. Her headset buzzed. We have a direct call routed from the Pentagon, said the voice on the other end, tight with urgency. A Colonel Whitaker. He's demanding to speak to the head of airport security, immediately. Alison paused, a bit thrown off. From where? Department of Defense. Internal line. Clearance level red. Her mouth dried slightly. I'll notify Director Kavanaugh. 3 minutes later, Thomas Kavanaugh, the head of security at Reagan National, a man known for his composed demeanor and 25 years of federal and private law enforcement, picked up a secure line in his office. "This is Kavanaugh. Colonel Joseph Whitaker. You have a situation involving one Harold B. Jackson, 74. Vietnam vet. You had him ejected this morning." Kavanaugh flipped open his daily log, fingers gliding to the incident report. "Sir, I believe he was removed for refusing secondary screening and exhibiting." "You will shut your mouth and listen to me very carefully," Whitaker interrupted, voice flat and lethal. "You just manhandled a decorated master sergeant who has saved more lives on the battlefield than most of your staff has filed reports. I'm authorizing immediate lockdown protocol until full investigation is launched. Terminal 2, effective immediately." Wait, lockdown? But Whitaker was no longer listening. The line went dead. Outside, Harold could feel it before he saw it, like a seismic shift in the air. An airport shuttle suddenly rerouted. Emergency response vehicles edged closer to the terminal from the tarmac. Inside, automated security protocols started lighting up in red on the surveillance dashboards. Back inside the terminal, one of the TSA agents who had confronted Harold, Agent Julie Keller, watched the sudden rush of supervisors, radios chirping with code-level chatter. "What's going on?" she asked. A nearby officer gave her a look that chilled her. "We've been ordered to halt all operations at Terminal 2. Nobody in or out." Julie blinked. "For what?" "Someone kicked out a VIP without realizing who the hell he was." Harold stood at the curb, watching. A female officer emerged from the sliding doors, coat flapping in the wind, a clipboard pressed to her chest. She walked straight to him, hesitated, then spoke. "Mr. Jackson?" He looked at her calmly. "That's me. My name is Lieutenant Rachel Sims, DoD Liaison. I've been asked to escort you back inside, sir. A formal apology will be issued immediately." "A senior delegation is on the way." Harold tilted his head slightly. "I'm not stepping back into that building until I know exactly what's going on." "I understand, but there's a command-level alert on your case." "And Colonel Whitaker, he's activated protocols we haven't seen since 9/11. Harold narrowed his eyes. "That wasn't my intention." She softened her voice. "With all due respect, sir, you earned it." He considered her, then gave a small nod. She reached down for his duffel, but he picked it up first. She didn't object. As they re-entered the terminal through a restricted side entrance, Harold caught the eyes of a dozen different employees, agents, janitors, clerks, suddenly alert, suddenly aware that this man wasn't just some elderly black veteran in a ball cap. Rachel led him to a private conference room on the mezzanine. 2 TSA directors and a man in a suit were already waiting. A silent tension filled the space. The man in the suit stood. "Mr. Jackson?" "I'm David Renner, Department of Homeland Security. Please accept our sincerest apologies. What happened this morning was unacceptable, and we take full responsibility." Harold sat down slowly. "You know, I've had worse greetings. Saigon 69 wasn't exactly warm either." There was an awkward chuckle from one of the directors. Harold didn't smile. "Do you know why I was here?" Renner nodded. "Your granddaughter, Maya Jackson." "Howard University. Her exhibit opens today." "Right. And instead of meeting her for breakfast, I'm sitting in a room being apologized to by men who think protocol comes before dignity." "No one should have treated you the way they did," Rachel said, gently. Harold finally leaned back. "Then let's fix this the right way." Outside that room, the news of the lockdown had started to leak. A few reporters were gathering near the restricted glass, trying to get a glimpse. One had already posted a video of Harold being led out earlier that morning. The clip had gone viral within an hour. "Decorated veteran removed from Reagan National without cause," read the trending caption. And just like that, the world outside the terminal began paying attention. Inside, Harold pulled out the folded letter he never got to read earlier, the one his wife had written before she died. He handed it to Rachel. "Would you mind?" he asked quietly. She nodded, unfolding the worn page. Her voice trembled slightly as she began to read aloud. "Harold, if you ever find yourself alone and doubting whether this country remembers you, know that I do. That I always have. And maybe one day someone else will too." Rachel looked up, eyes glistening. Harold gave a small smile. "I guess today's that day." The terminal may have shut down, but something far more powerful had been turned on. Respect. The sky over Washington, D.C. remained still, clouded and indifferent, while inside Reagan National Airport, the storm was just beginning to brew. What had started as a routine morning was quickly unraveling behind the scenes. In a small operations room adjacent to Terminal B, phones were ringing, not just the standard calls from airlines or staff, but encrypted lines, flashing codes that only a handful of people in the building understood. Back outside, Harold B. Jackson sat motionless on a concrete bench near the employee parking lot, duffel beside him, flip phone clenched in his hand. The cold gnawed at his knees, but he didn't move. Years of service had trained him to wait in silence, even when every nerve in his body screamed at him to demand justice now. Inside the terminal, however, things were already moving fast. TSA agent Claire Monroe, the younger of the two who had questioned Harold earlier, was in a back hallway pacing with a clipboard. Her face was flushed. "You saw his ID. His name's legit. The duffel's clean." "Why the hell was he pulled?" she hissed at her colleague, Agent Riley. Riley shrugged, clearly unsettled. "We got a tip." "That's it. An anonymous call flagged him. Standard protocol." "Standard protocol doesn't include publicly humiliating a decorated vet." "He didn't resist. He didn't even raise his damn voice." Riley didn't answer, because truth be told, he was already regretting it. The moment the words false identity came out of his mouth, something in Harold's eyes had cut right through him. There wasn't fear or guilt there, just insult. Cold and deep. In the command office on the mezzanine level, Assistant Director Raymond Goodson stared at a blinking red light on his secure terminal phone. He'd seen that light only twice in his 20-year career. Both times, it had preceded federal intervention within minutes. He picked it up. "Goodson, this is Colonel Joseph Whitaker, Department of Defense. Effective immediately, you are to lock down access to all security tapes, personnel records, and external communication logs from the last 45 minutes. I will arrive in 20 minutes. Make sure Mr. Harold B. Jackson is secured and not harassed further." Goodson's mouth went dry. "Sir, I wasn't aware of any." "You're aware now. And Director, I suggest you start reviewing your chain of command before I do." The line went dead. Goodson exhaled through his nose and turned to the nearest security supervisor. "Find out who authorized that vet's removal. Now." Meanwhile, Harold finally stood. He had waited long enough. Just as he reached down for his duffel, a black SUV with federal plates turned sharply into the lot and stopped 10 feet away. The passenger door opened, and a tall man in civilian clothes with the unmistakable bearing of military command stepped out. "Sergeant Jackson?" he asked. Harold looked up. His eyes narrowed. "Colonel Whitaker sent me. Name's James Carver. Department of Defense liaison. You've caused quite a stir this morning." Harold nodded slowly, not smugly. "Didn't intend to. But I wasn't going to just sit there and let them drag me through the mud." Carver looked around and gestured toward the SUV. "Let's get you inside. And let's do it through the front door." They walked shoulder to shoulder, 2 generations of service etched into their posture. At the entrance to the terminal, Two stunned airport police officers moved to stop them. Carver flashed his badge. Their hands fell to their sides. Word had already started spreading. As Harold re-entered the terminal, a shift occurred. People noticed. The same security officer who had manhandled him was now standing off to the side, arms crossed tight, jaw set, eyes avoiding Harold's gaze. Harold walked right past him, unbothered, until Carver stopped. "Name?" Carver asked the guard sharply. "Matthews." Carver leaned in just enough. "You'll be hearing from the Inspector General's office. I suggest you start writing your report now." Inside the operations room, Agent Monroe watched the monitors in disbelief. "Is that Whitaker's guy?" Riley leaned forward. "No way." On the main concourse, Harold paused near Gate 26, where it had all begun. A mother with two kids tugged her cart aside to let him pass. The woman gave him a small nod, respectful, almost apologetic. As they approached the VIP security room, a young African-American woman in a grey blazer rushed toward them. "Grandpa!" Harold turned just in time for Maya to throw her arms around him. Her curls bounced as she squeezed him tight, tears in her eyes. "I've been calling and calling. They told me you never showed up." "I was here," Harold said gently. "They just didn't want to believe it." Carver stood back, letting the reunion happen. But his phone buzzed again. Another alert. Another escalation. The Department of Homeland Security had now flagged the incident as a potential civil rights violation. Congressional staffers were already involved. Harold turned to Carver. "What now?" Carver raised an eyebrow. "Now? You're getting an official apology. And then we shut this thing down until we know how it happened." Maya looked confused. "What do you mean, shut it down?" Before either man could answer, the lights above flickered briefly, and an overhead announcement echoed through the terminal. "Attention! Due to a temporary systems audit, all operations in Terminal B are paused. Passengers, please remain in your current location. We apologize for the inconvenience." Harold smiled faintly. Carver grinned. "That was you, Sergeant?" "No," Harold said, his voice calm and steady. "That was them remembering who I am." And for the first time since sunrise, Harold B. Jackson stood not as a suspect, not as a profile, but as a man the system had tried and failed to forget. The hush inside Terminal B wasn't just a pause, it was a pressure cooker. Every flickering screen, every halted boarding announcement, every stalled line at the security checkpoints felt like it was teetering on the edge of something larger than anyone could yet understand. Inside the security operations room, Assistant Director Raymond Goodson paced like a caged animal. The order from the Department of Defense had been swift and absolute, and it left no room for interpretation. Lock down all systems, preserve all communications, and prepare to account for every move made against Harold B. Jackson. Meanwhile, Harold sat in a private conference room near the VIP lounge, Maya beside him, her hand resting gently over his. She hadn't let go since they'd reunited, and the tremble in her grip betrayed the fear that still clung to her chest. "I thought they lost you," she whispered, her voice thick. "I was at the gate. They kept saying you weren't in the system." Harold gave a soft chuckle. "Not the first time I've been erased. Probably won't be the last." Across the table, James Carver reviewed a thick folder that had been couriered from DHS headquarters. Names, timestamps, flight logs, and camera angles, some of which showed Harold being accosted, his bag pulled, his arm grabbed. There were half a dozen videos from bystanders already circulating online. One had reached nearly 1 million views in under 2 hours, captioned simply, "They dragged a veteran out of the airport like a criminal." "Colonel Whitaker's en route," Carver said. "But he's not coming quietly. Neither is the media." Harold met his gaze. They don't need to know my name. Too late for that, Carver replied. Someone leaked the call log. The world knows you called the Department of Defense directly. That doesn't happen by accident. There was a knock at the door. It opened slowly to reveal Assistant Director Goodson himself, flanked by 2 DHS compliance officers. His face was pale, jaw tight, shoulders stiff as if walking into a battlefield. He set a manila folder down on the table and cleared his throat. Mr. Jackson, I've come to apologize. Harold didn't move. He studied the man in silence, letting the weight of that apology hang. Goodson continued. Your removal from the terminal was unjustified. The report that triggered the intervention was anonymous, lacking actionable detail, and should have been flagged for secondary verification. It wasn't. That's on us. That's on me. And the guard? Maya asked, her voice sharper than her grandfather's. Goodson shifted uneasily. The private contractor who physically removed Mr. Jackson has been placed on immediate leave. His badge access is revoked pending a full review. Harold leaned forward slightly. You ever been pulled out of a line with a duffel on your back, Mr. Goodson? No, sir. Then maybe you can't quite understand what it feels like to be treated like a threat when all you did was show up. Goodson nodded slowly. You're right. I can't. But I intend to make this right. Carver spoke up. He doesn't want a plaque or a ceremony. What he wants is dignity. He earned that decades ago. Just then, the door burst open again. Colonel Joseph Whitaker strode in, tall, commanding, with silver at his temples and fire in his eyes. His uniform blazer was off, but his presence made everyone instinctively sit straighter. Harold, he said with warmth, you look the same. Maybe a little more stubborn. Harold cracked a grin. Takes one to know one. Whitaker turned to Goodson. Director, my office has already contacted your superiors. This is now a formal federal investigation into profiling, procedural overreach, and unlawful detainment. Goodson looked down. Understood. Whitaker then dropped a bomb. Also, the anonymous tip. We traced it. The call came from an internal extension inside this building. Someone here flagged Harold as a potential impersonator 5 minutes after his arrival. The room went dead silent. Maya sat up. Wait, someone inside the airport called him in? Correct, Whitaker confirmed. We don't know who yet. But the logs show it. Could have been personal. Could have been malicious. Either way, it wasn't random. Harold exhaled deeply, eyes narrowed. So not just racism. Conspiracy. Carver shook his head slowly. You're a threat, Harold. Not because of anything you did today, but because you remind them they can't just get away with it anymore. A few minutes later, the press began to gather outside the terminal. Word had spread about a shutdown connected to the mistreatment of a veteran, and news crews were waiting like sharks. Inside, Harold stood gathering his bag. You leaving? Carver asked. Not running, just tired. Got a granddaughter's art show to catch. Maya smiled, then looked to Whitaker. You sure this won't just disappear? Whitaker met her gaze. Not this time. Sometimes it takes the right wrong to force a system to change. Harold walked to the door, paused and looked back at all of them. I didn't ask for this, didn't want a scene. But if it made one kid with a camera realize that silence doesn't always win, then maybe it was worth it. He nodded once. Then he walked out into the terminal, where passengers had resumed moving, but many turned to watch him pass. Some clapped, some simply stood. Not because he was famous, but because he had stood his ground. And that meant more than rank, medals, or apologies ever could. By the time Harold and Maya reached the parking structure, the afternoon sun was cutting sharp angles through the rows of vehicles, and the chill from earlier had given way to the kind of mild, deceptive warmth that made spring in DC feel like a truce. But Harold's breath remained steady, controlled, the kind he'd learned to master in combat zones, when the outside looked calm, but the inside was bracing for an ambush. They walked in silence for a while, the echo of their steps trailing them. Maya unlocked her car with a click, and Harold threw his duffel in the back seat, still not saying a word. He paused before getting in. "You okay?" Maya asked softly. "I'm fine," he said, then corrected himself. "I will be." She didn't push him. They drove. Maya's hands were tight on the steering wheel, her jaw clenched. Harold noticed. "You've got that same look your mama used to get," he said. "What look?" "Like you're planning someone's funeral." "I'm not," she said. "But I am thinking about who needs to lose their job." Harold looked out the window. "That's not always the answer." "No," Maya snapped. "But sometimes it's the damn consequence." Traffic along George Washington Parkway was light, but helicopters buzzed in the sky above. Maya's phone buzzed too. Notifications from social media, group texts, news pings. It was all blowing up faster than either of them could absorb. Harold didn't touch his phone. Instead, he kept a firm grip on the folded card he'd taken back from that security guard. The one with Whitaker's number. The same card he hadn't used in nearly 20 years. "You think this is going to just die down?" Maya asked. "I mean, cameras caught everything. They humiliated you." "They tried," Harold corrected. "But I didn't give them the satisfaction." Maya shot him a glance. "So what now? Just let them say sorry and move on?" "You deserve more than that, Grandpa." "I know what I deserve," Harold said, voice steady. "But this ain't just about me anymore. Someone inside called me in on a lie." "That's what we have to find." Maya nodded slowly. "Colonel Whitaker said it came from an internal extension, right?" "Yeah, someone working there," Harold muttered. "Or someone with access to the system." They pulled into a small public lot near the National Mall. Maya killed the engine, and the two of them just sat in the car for a moment. Tourists wandered the sidewalks nearby. Life was moving on, oblivious. But inside the car, it felt like something bigger was settling into place. Maya unlocked her phone and started tapping quickly. "What are you doing?" Harold asked. "Using my university login to cross-reference names. My friend Carla's sister works at Reagan's Human Resources Department." "She's helped me before." "Maya, I'm not doing anything illegal," she said. "Just connecting dots." Harold raised an eyebrow. "You always this persistent?" She smirked. "Runs in the family." Within minutes, she had an email address and 2 names pulled from the security schedule, one of which matched the internal extension used to report Harold, a junior administrative analyst named Ryan Harrow, newly hired. No prior federal service. "Never heard of him," Harold said. "You think this kid's just that racist?" Maya shook her head. "No, I think he's stupid, but I also think he's a pawn." She turned in her seat, facing him directly. "Grandpa, what if this wasn't random? You think someone targeted me on purpose?" Maya hesitated. "Maybe not you, but your name." "Your background, your connection to Whitaker. Someone inside that airport had to know what pulling your file would trigger." Harold's eyes narrowed. "A test, or a trap?" "Exactly," she said. "But they messed with the wrong man." Back at the airport, meanwhile, Colonel Whitaker wasn't wasting time. He was inside a secured briefing room with DHS, TSA leadership, and senior airport administrators. Surveillance logs were being reviewed. Call records were being cross-checked. Whitaker stood at the front of the room with a copy of the airport's internal employee roster in hand. His finger tapped a name. "This," he said, "is who placed the call. But I don't think he acted alone." "Sir," one of the airport's compliance officers interrupted, "this is just a low-level employee. He doesn't have access to clearance files." "Exactly," Whitaker replied. "So who gave him a name to flag?" Silence. One by one, the pieces were lining up. Someone inside the terminal had wanted a reaction. Someone who knew triggering a false security alert on Harold would initiate a chain of embarrassment, delay, and possibly cover-up. But they hadn't counted on who Harold was, or who he still knew. Back in the car, Harold finally looked at his phone. A message had come through. Confirmed. Harrow accessed passenger profiles flagged with military records. Disciplinary hearing opened. Further action to follow. Whitaker. Harold handed the phone to Maya. She read the message, then leaned back in her seat. "They got him." Harold nodded. "That's just the beginning." Maya looked at him, eyes burning. "You're going to testify, aren't you?" Harold exhaled. "If that's what it takes. Yeah." They sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was full. Full of the weight of what they were doing, what Harold was walking back into, not war, but something almost as complex, justice in a system that didn't always know how to give it. Finally, Maya turned the key in the ignition. "Where to?" Harold smiled, slow and tired. "Let's go see that art show." And as they pulled back onto the road, neither of them noticed the black sedan following from 3 cars behind. But someone else was watching now, and they weren't done. The gallery was tucked inside an old brick building near Howard University, sunlight slanting through its wide, street-facing windows as students buzzed around, pinning last-minute labels, adjusting spotlights, and nervously comparing sketches. A banner outside read, "Howard School of Fine Arts Senior Showcase, Expressions of Identity." Harold followed Maya through the doors, his steps a little slower, but his presence still commanding. A few heads turned when he entered, some students noticing the man in the crisp wool coat with a Vietnam vet hat, and the sharp eyes that made him look less like a grandpa and more like a man who had seen the world shift more times than they could imagine. Maya was greeted by her peers with hugs and excited questions. She introduced Harold as her grandfather, and for a few minutes the tension faded. He smiled politely, answering questions about his service, cracking a dry joke or two, but the weight behind his smile never lifted completely. Because in the back of his mind, he knew this piece was borrowed time. It wasn't until an older woman in a grey blazer with a university badge leaned in to whisper in Maya's ear that the calm shattered. "There are 2 men outside asking for you," the woman said quietly. "Suits. Said they're with the FAA and the Department of Homeland Security. I didn't let them in." Harold straightened immediately. "How many?" "Just 2 that I saw. But they didn't look like they came for the art." Maya turned to Harold. "What do we do?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the nearest window and scanned the street below. Black sedan. Same make and model from the parking lot earlier. It wasn't paranoia if you'd lived through 1,000 traps. He'd seen setups more subtle than this in Kandahar. "Call Whitaker," he said. "Now." Maya pulled out her phone, but Harold took it from her gently. "Use mine. Less traceable." Back in the car outside, Agent Mark Riley sat with his jaw clenched. He was ex-CIA, now on contract with DHS's Aviation Threat Assessment Unit, and he didn't like being kept outside a college building on orders he didn't understand. His partner, Valerie Singh, checked her tablet again. "He's in there," she confirmed. "Maya Jackson too. We still going in?" Riley glanced at his comm. "Still no response from command." "I don't like that." Back inside, Maya handed the flip phone to Harold. The line buzzed once before Whitaker picked up. "This is Whitaker. It's Harold." "They followed us." There was a pause. Then Whitaker's voice came back clipped and loaded. "You're not under arrest. They don't have jurisdiction without a signed order." "Do not engage." "Should I leave?" Harold asked. "Negative. Stay put." "Let me make a few calls." The line went dead. Maya looked panicked now. "Grandpa, they know we're digging." "What if this goes deeper?" "It already does," he said. "You saw the records. That report that flagged me didn't come from a junior analyst. Someone higher up is cleaning house." Before she could respond, a knock rattled the front doors of the gallery. A few students looked up, startled. One of the men outside held up a badge through the glass. "Federal Aviation Administration," he announced. "We just want to ask a few questions." Harold walked forward, slowly but with that military gait Maya had come to recognize. He opened the door a crack, enough for the man's face to register, but not enough to let him through. "I know who you are," Harold said calmly, "and I know you don't have jurisdiction in a private university building without proper notice or a warrant." Riley narrowed his eyes. "Sir, we're not here to arrest you." "Good," Harold replied. "Because if you lay another hand on me without cause, I'll make sure the video ends up on the front page of the Washington Post. You hear me?" Riley took a breath. "There's concern over national security implications." "Your contact with Colonel Whitaker triggered alerts. Because someone planted a false flag in my passenger record," Harold snapped. "And we're going to find out who." Behind him, the art students were watching now, phones subtly recording. Riley glanced at them, then turned to his partner. "Let's go," he said. "What?" Singh asked. "We're not going to win this one today." They turned and walked away. Maya exhaled like she hadn't breathed in a minute. "Was that a bluff?" Harold nodded. "Mostly." "What now?" "Now we bring this to the light," Harold said. "The press, the people, the ones who need to know what kind of system this is becoming." That night, Maya uploaded the footage of her grandfather being removed from the terminal alongside a new clip. Harold at the gallery, confronting federal agents. The clips exploded online. Veteran justice trended within an hour. Retired service members from across the country reposted it with stories of their own profiling, black veterans especially. But the twist came just before midnight. Whitaker called again. His voice wasn't calm anymore. "Harold, we traced the chain of commands tied to that security alert. It wasn't just internal airport personnel. Someone from DHS's intelligence branch accessed your background clearance file." "What?" Harold asked, sitting upright. "They flagged your visit under an outdated watch list file. One that was supposed to be scrubbed over a decade ago. It's either a bureaucratic screw-up or deliberate misuse." Harold's hand tightened around the phone. "Which means?" he asked. Whitaker's voice dropped. "Which means someone tried to make you look like a threat, and we need to find out who benefits from that." Harold's eyes hardened. "We will," and he meant it. The next morning broke cold and sharp, the kind of DC morning where even the sunlight felt like it had somewhere more important to be. Harold Jackson stood at Maya's apartment window, looking out over a street still slick from the overnight drizzle. His hand rested on the windowsill, fingers steady, though inside him the fire had only grown hotter. He had spent the night reviewing old files. Names, ranks, places, patterns. What had seemed like a humiliating mistake at the airport now felt like the symptom of something far worse, an attempt to erase him, quietly, with paper trails and invisible codes. He wasn't just being watched. He was being erased. Maya appeared behind him, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She didn't speak, just handed one to him. He nodded his thanks and took a sip, then said, "You know what they were really doing yesterday? Trying to scare you," she said. "No," Harold answered, voice calm. "They were testing me. Seeing how far they could push before someone pushed back." There was a knock on the door. Maya tensed. Harold didn't. He just walked over and opened it. Colonel Joseph Whitaker stood on the other side, in civilian clothes, trench coat soaked at the shoulders. His presence filled the room in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. The two men didn't speak for a moment. Then Whitaker nodded. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" Harold asked. "For taking this long to show up in person." Harold moved aside to let him in. Maya cleared the coffee table and Whitaker laid down a folder, thick, sealed, government grade with a red stripe diagonally across the top. Whitaker sat. "We dug deeper, and what we found changes everything." He opened the file. Inside were copies of Harold's service records, travel logs, and a specific DHS memo with "flagged, subject potentially radicalized due to post-combat isolation." Maya leaned over. "That's absurd." Whitaker nodded. "It's also fake." "Your real file was edited, redacted, then replaced with a duplicate designed to raise red flags in automated surveillance scans. They thought no one would ever check the original, except we did." "Who?" Harold asked. "We traced the authorization code to a private defense contractor with DHS clearance. Their name is Arconis Solutions. Ever heard of them?" Harold's jaw tightened. "I've heard of the CEO. Raymond Voss. He was a major back in Afghanistan. Used to run intel sweeps on local civilians." "Cold operator. Ruthless." "Same guy," Whitaker said. "Now he runs threat analysis algorithms for airports across the country." "And for some reason, your name was manually entered into their Red Zone database." Maya said what Harold was thinking. Someone wanted him silenced. "No," Harold corrected. "Someone wanted me disappeared." Quietly, efficiently, with just enough confusion to make it look like the system doing its job. Whitaker leaned in. "You ready to go public?" Harold didn't answer right away. He looked at Maya, then back to the colonel. "I didn't survive 3 tours, 2 strokes, and being thrown out of my own country's airport to sit in silence," he said. "I'm not just ready. I'm coming for all of them." Whitaker smiled. "That's what I hoped you'd say, because there's something else." He reached into his coat and pulled out a flash drive. "This is everything we've found. Internal memos, contract details, and a recording, an internal briefing from Arconis 2 months ago where they mention you by name." Harold blinked. "Me?" Whitaker nodded. "They were using your story as a case study in behavioral risk modeling, saying veterans with trauma and limited digital footprints could be threats. You were their example profile." Maya gasped. "That's why they flagged you." "That's why it was so smooth. The system was rigged to think he was dangerous." "And now," Whitaker said, "you're going to be the one to take it down." That night, Harold and Maya appeared on a major independent media channel. The host, a well-known black journalist named Devon Ellis, let Harold speak uninterrupted. He told the entire story: his service, the profiling, the forced removal, the silence from officials, and now the truth. By the time the interview ended, the footage had gone viral. Veterans groups started calling. Civil rights attorneys offered representation. A congressional staffer reached out. But the most shocking twist came the next morning when a whistleblower from inside Arconis contacted Maya through a secure email. The subject line read, "We never meant to target him, but someone paid to make it happen." And attached was a memo. Classified. Signed by Raymond Voss himself. The morning Washington Post headline read, "Decorated Black Veteran Targeted by DHS contractor. Whistleblower reveals conspiracy. Harold B. Jackson stared at the paper on Maya's kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a cup of hot tea. The picture beside the headline was of him standing beside Maya, his old army jacket zipped halfway, his face calm but hard, etched with history. The email from the Arconis whistleblower had made it all possible. It wasn't just some vague statement. It was a bombshell. A signed internal memo, dated 2 weeks before Harold's flight, listed him by name, identifying him as a high-profile veteran with unpredictable behavioral patterns. The document included a directive to flag his movements and delay further screening until DHS could evaluate his risk profile. In other words, Arconis had marked him before he even boarded his flight. Worse, the memo was signed by Raymond Voss himself. Maya sat across the table, scrolling through her phone. "You're trending on every platform," she said, stunned. "Veterans groups are marching today in front of the Arconis DC headquarters. Civil rights lawyers have filed an injunction, and CNN wants you for a live interview at 7. Harold blinked slowly. 7 p.m.? She grinned. AM. He shook his head. I don't need TV lights. I just want this to mean something. At that moment, Joseph Whitaker entered the apartment, a manila envelope under his arm. You've got more support than you know, he said without preamble. A bipartisan group of senators is calling for a full investigation into Arconis. And the Department of Defense has suspended their contract until a formal review is completed. Harold raised an eyebrow. That's fast. Whitaker nodded. Because this isn't just a mistake. It's a system built on quiet erasure. You're not the first, but you might be the last to stay silent. He opened the envelope and slid out a document. There's something else. After this hit the media, someone else came forward. A woman named Sergeant Delilah Ames. Retired Air Force, same treatment at LAX last year. She recognized your story. She's filing a joint lawsuit. Harold leaned back, the wheels in his mind turning. So it's bigger than just me. It always was, Whitaker said. Maya tapped her phone and turned it toward him. You have to see this. It was a video clip, uploaded just an hour before. A young man, white, early 30s, stood in front of the Arconis headquarters with a sign that read, My father served with Sergeant Jackson. I remember the stories. This isn't justice. Behind him were dozens of others, black, white, Latino, Asian, some in uniform, some in jeans. And more signs. We stand with Harold. We won't be erased. Accountability now. Harold stared at the screen for a long time, his eyes glassy but unbroken. Then he looked at Maya. Let's go. They arrived at the protest an hour later. The crowd had swelled to nearly 200 people. Cameras rolled. People chanted. Harold stepped out of the car slowly, steadying himself with the help of a cane Whitaker had insisted he bring. The moment he appeared, a hush swept through the crowd. Then someone clapped, then another. Within seconds, the applause turned to cheers. Harold walked to the makeshift podium, a folding table with a portable mic, and waited until the noise settled. I'm not here for revenge, he said into the mic, voice steady. I'm here because silence is no longer acceptable. I've served this country. I've bled for it. I've buried my brothers under its flag. But what happened to me is not just about me. It's about a system that quietly decides who gets to matter and who doesn't. He paused, letting the words land. I was profiled not because I did something wrong, but because someone with a spreadsheet decided my past made me a risk. They tried to erase my story, but here we are, telling it louder than ever. The crowd erupted again, but he raised a hand for quiet. If they thought a 74-year-old vet with a bad knee and a flip phone couldn't fight back, they were wrong. I've fought tougher wars than this, but this fight, this one isn't just mine. It's ours. Maya stepped beside him, her hand gripping his tightly. So let's fight it, in court, in media. In our neighborhoods. Let's fight for a country where justice isn't selective, where veterans aren't thrown out of airports like criminals. Where people aren't erased because they don't fit the algorithm. Applause thundered again, but this time there were tears too. That night, the footage aired on every major network. Arconis Solutions issued a press statement claiming internal miscommunication, but it wasn't enough. 2 board members resigned. Voss was placed on administrative leave pending federal inquiry. Within a week, Congress had opened a formal hearing. And Harold? He stayed in D.C. For Maya's showcase, she painted a portrait of him, titled simply, Unbroken. It now hangs in the foyer of the African American History Museum. Before returning to Georgia, Harold filmed one last message, sitting beneath the cherry blossoms in a quiet D.C. Park. He looked straight into the lens and said, "To everyone who ever felt small, ignored, dismissed, your story matters. Don't let them tell you otherwise. Stand up, speak loud, and never, ever let anyone erase you." Then he paused, smiled faintly, and added, "And if you believe in stories that need to be told, subscribe to this channel. Because we're just getting started."